Hey guys, welcome to Interpreting Wine Podcast, first ever spirit category series. For those of you that don't know me, I am the host and founder of Interpreting Wine, Lawrence Francis. And in July and August 2019, I sat down with 3 of the world's most respected rum experts, and we'll be bringing you their interviews as part of this series. These episodes will feature in order of release. In episode 281, Peter Holland, rum consultant, educator and writer. In episode 282, Sly Augustin, owner at Tiki Bar Institution, Trailer Happiness. And in episode 283, Dawn Davies MW, head buyer at the Whisky Exchange. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast so that you'll get a notification when new episodes are released. And without further ado, here's today's episode of the Rum series. Today's episode of the podcast marks the third and final part of my very special series looking at the category of rum. And who better to finish the series off with than with Dawn Davies MW, head buyer at the Whisky Exchange. It's worth stating before we start the episode that the idea for the series came out of a conversation I had with Dawn when recording for a previous episode, so a huge thank you to her. She starts things off by telling us how she first got into rum, before we do a deep dive into the rum classification system that Dawn implemented at the Whisky Exchange, before my favourite part, as Dawn expertly demonstrates the classification system with a tasting of different rums made in each of the styles. And we finish things off by looking ahead for some essential rum events for your calendar. Enjoy.
So, why do I love rum? And where did I start loving rum? Do you know, that's a really, really hard question. I think it's actually really grown quite kind of organically. I remember the first time I really tried rum properly, I was in Zuma. We just opened Zuma. And they had a bottle of Ron Zacapa on the back bar. And the bartender at the time said to me, "You've got to try this." And I remember trying it thinking, wow, this is damn good. And, you know, and I've slowly as the years have gone on, I've tasted more, I've tested more. I mean, one of my favorite trips ever was going to Diplomatico in Venezuela and totally falling in love with the passion and the people there. And, you know, I think then I started sort of, you know, your palate changes and you start kind of understanding different products and liking different things. You know, I did start with rums that were sweeter in style. And now I find that I'm going more down the rums that are a little bit more serious, maybe you could say. Like then I fell in love with Foursquare, which, probably I fell in love with Richard Seal, who just makes me laugh. And then I met Luca, from Velier, and he really, really opened my eyes, him and a guy called Danny Biondi, to actually what else is out there in terms of flavor profile from these crazy rums that just had so much passion and life in them. And you know, and then I started work on the classification system. So we launched a new classification system this year. And I spent a lot of time doing research because there was so much to find out. And the more I learnt, the more I wanted to learn. And I think it comes from that, maybe from the MW side of my life, is that actually I really enjoy studying when I make myself do it. I am a bit lazy. And, you know, just really learning, I got super passionate because I think the people in rum are so passionate. You know, they remind me of winemakers. They, you know, they love their product. They, you know, they every time you talk to someone about rum, whether you like the brand or not, it doesn't matter. They're all very, very passionate people. And it's that sort of sunshine that rum brings that's made me fall in love with it, I guess.
You know, one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on this series, I've read and I've seen a lot online about rum classification, and you know, I've sort of geeked out a little bit as well. I've got into some of the Facebook groups and the comments, and yeah, what's been sort of going backwards and forwards, and I think where you, I think, can add a massive amount of value to the listener today is to just talk about the classification system, I guess a little bit of its origins as well. Giving credit, I guess, to the originators and the people that I know that you've collaborated with in its inception. And then, kind of take us forward into what is it doing for you here at the Whisky Exchange? What are you sort of getting, I guess, in terms of feedback, and what is that looking like for you?
4 years ago when I joined Whisky Exchange, Sukhinder and I sat down, and, the one thing we said right off the bat is that rum, we want to look at how we talk about it online. I was very passionate even 4 years ago saying I think rum is going to be the next big spirit. That was very, very clear in my mind. And one thing I've done throughout my career is really look at what the trends are going to be in the future. And for me, rum was very, very much up there. And you get busy, and life kind of goes by. And then I guess because I suddenly was like, hold on, I really want to engage in this conversation in rum. And, as I said, when I met Luca from Velier, and I became very good friends with Richard Seal from Foursquare, they've taught me a huge amount, and they started the classification system. And the reason they started it was there's no framework in rum. Rum's a very loose thing. What is rum? It can be, the closest they've got to classifying it is white, gold, and dark. I mean, that means absolutely nothing. A gold rum may not have even been aged. It may just have caramel in it. It's insane. And then they talk about English style rums, French style rums, Spanish style rums. But again, what does that tell the customer? Not a lot. And I think there was a real need out there for someone to start talking to the consumers. I think Luca and Richard have been very passionate and talked beautifully to the trade, but I think it needed a retailer to go and do something, because we are the direct line to the consumer, and if you want to engage a consumer in anything, they have to understand it first and foremost. So we thought that the classification system that they'd put in place, and it is their classification system, all we've done is maybe amended names a little bit to make it a bit more consumer friendly. And we've added in a layer around flavor. So I'll talk you through it. So the first thing we started off was, what is it made from? Is it molasses, sugarcane juice, sugarcane honey? And that's key. It's like grapes. What grape variety is it? That is going to influence the flavor. So I came at it looking at it from a flavor person's point of view. What influence, what can I taste? When I'm doing my MW, I had to do so many blind tastings to understand, can I taste where that product's from? Or how do I understand that product? How is it made? Can I taste it? And I think that's really, really key. So, that base product is super important. So when you have sugarcane juice rums, you get this really lovely grassy kind of character from them. For example, molasses-based rums tend to be less of that grassy herbaceous style, more into the rich, rounder styles. So, that very much influences flavor. The next layer is how it's made. And in rum, that's really split it very simply. We looked at it in terms of, Scotch whisky. You have single malts and you have blended. So single from one distillery only. Blended, a blend of distilleries potentially. And that, again, was something we wanted to layer in, because we felt that actually the consumer already understands that concept because of whisky. So we then looked at the production. So we have a single distillery, and they produce in, say, let's put it very top line, 4 different ways. The first way is in a pot still. Pot still gives you very heavy spirit, rich, intense spirit. You can taste it in the glass. So then you had a single traditional pot still rum. The second way is, and if you're kind of sort of going sort of from very heavy to very light, would be into a traditional column still. A traditional column still, single traditional column still, indicates it's probably about 1 to 2 different columns. It's a coffee column or something like that, a traditional old school column still, let's say. And with a column still, because the style of evaporation and the style of distillation, you get lighter flavors, but you still get quite a lot of flavor coming through there. But the spirit itself tends to be a bit lighter. Then you kind of have a blend between pot and traditional column. So that was a single blended rum. Then the final one is what we're calling a modernist rum. And these are rums that are made on multi-column stills. So a multi-column still, the difference between a traditional column still and a multi-column still is the addition of what we call the purifier. The purifier is what sort of removes quite a lot of flavor from the rum. And I'm not saying that's bad or that's good. I'm saying that's a style, and these have been used for years, and people like Bacardi, Havana use them. And I can't call Bacardi or Havana modern. They're not modern distilleries. They're old distilleries. They have history and they have tradition. And, without these distilleries, a lot of people would never have tried rum. So, it was very important to kind of have a word that didn't sound industrial or anything like that, because yes, it is quite an industrial process. Yes, it creates very light rums, but it's not bad or good. It's style. And so we had the 4 main types. And also some of them can be blended within that. But if it has any modernist stills in it, what we've said is that comes under modernist camp, even though it may have a bit of pot and a bit of column. And that's purely because you do get the sense of that very light rum coming off a multi-column still. Then you had what we call the blended ones. So these are blenders from different islands, potentially different distilleries. And again, they fall into 2 camps. Blended traditionalist, which would be using either pot or traditional column, and blended modernist, which would again be the multi-columns or rums with the influence of multi-column in. Then also we sort of took that and we said, okay, so that's great in terms of being able to fit rums into categories and to kind of give a sense of what it is. But how many consumers really understand what a multi-column is or what a pot still is? Yeah, that language is coming, but it's not out there totally. And I was talking to a guy called Paul McFadden from Plantation, who I very much respect. And he was like, well, flavour is really key. And I was like, flavour. Okay. We already do flavour camps for whiskey. Let's do flavour camps for rum. And I started breaking down the styles. And I was looking at what flavours do I get in rum. And I was like, okay, this is interesting. I get light and uncomplicated rums. So, that's your mixing rums. You get herbaceous and grassy rums, which are your rums that are more kind of they tend to be the sugarcane juice rums. Then you get your sort of fruity and spicy. These tends to be either pot still, then with oak influence. You get tropical and fruity, and those tend to be the ones that have got maybe the Dunder Pit influence. Let's say something like HAMPDEN that's got these really rich, intense styles. And then you've got dry and spicy, and these tend to be rums that have maybe come off a modernist still that have wood influence, where the wood is actually the dominant flavour in the rum. And the more I went around and tasted, the more the kind of the production methods fit the flavour camps I'd created. And I thought, actually, I'm onto something here, because this is a way to talk to a consumer, but at the same time give them education as well, because I think that's really important. People want to learn, they want to understand, and this was a really simple way of doing it. The other thing we also layered in was no additions. That's something we're quite passionate about. I think the one thing that rum is really missing is transparency. Transparency is key. If you want to gain the consumer's trust, you have to tell them what they're drinking. And if it's got sugar added, fine, it's got sugar added. A lot of these rums that have sugar added are actually the consumer loves. So I'm not going to turn around and say to a consumer, don't drink that. But what I want them to know is that there is sugar added into it, because that's just being honest with your customer. And, I think the other thing that's very, very key to me, and probably more from my wine background that I wanted to layer in, was around where it's aged. Because for me, that is a huge part of what I call terroir. And, I think spirits have a lot of terroir? I'm a wine girl at the heart. But I do think, yes, if the rum is aged in the Caribbean, it's gonna taste different than if it's been partially aged in the Caribbean and then taken to Europe and finished the aging. because of the rate of evaporation, the concentration between the oxygen and the air. There's so many factors that are going to affect how that rum's taste. So again, I think that's that transparency about where it's aged. And a lot of the rums we're seeing in the market today, especially when they're under a generic label and not under a distillery label, are actually aged for a long part of their life in Europe. And that's not going to taste the same. There's no way. And I think there's a lot in that is key for the customer to understand. So, when we built this classification system, it took me a long time and a lot of help. I mean, I have to say, I had a lot of help from Luca, from Richard, from Daniele. Yeah, I love those guys. They were incredible, and I couldn't have done it without them for sure. But at the same time, there was a lot of research, and I think the more I looked, the worse I felt that there was no information out there. The more I felt there was no information out there. And I think rum, to get to a point of, say, Scotch whiskey or cognac, let's say, has to have more regulation, has to have more structure, because the customer likes structure. They like to understand. I want to go into a shop. If I go into a shop and I see an Islay whiskey, okay, not all of them, but I probably know it's going to be a bit smoky and it's going to have a certain style to it. Same with if I know a whiskey's been aged in sherry cask, I know that there's going to be a certain style around that. And with the rum, we don't have that. It's just, here's a rum from, I don't know, blah, 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 and it's in a pretty bottle. Well, it could have flavor added into it that I don't know about. It could have sugar added into it that I don't know about. It could have been aged in China for all I know. And, I think that's a real issue that the industry at the moment is trying to tackle in terms of the rum side of things. Gosh, that was quite a long one.
Yeah, well, as you say, long, but I think, necessary and, detailed and information sort of packed summary there, because, I think it is complicated. As we've touched on kind of in the series, rum itself is a complex drink. It's got a complex history. So therefore, the categorization, has been, let's say neglected. But when you get into it, then, there's a lot of different factors at play, really. Kind of playing devil's advocate really here, then I've written down, and I'll try to include a link to a sort of a more of a visual of this. But I'm wondering, what would be, for somebody like me, I'm like super visual guy, how do you envisage, or how have you seen this kind of turning up on a label, in a sense of, I walk in, I want to get a rum as a present, I'm not a regular rum drinker. How could all of, I guess, what you've just said there, how could that sort of be boiled down into something on a label that lets me know exactly what I'm getting?
So I think in terms of a label, we're starting on our own bottling. So we've been doing a couple of rums recently, and we're requesting that the producer puts on our classification. Richard Seal already puts it on his, more along what him and Luca developed. So not exactly our terminology, but they're really close enough. Luca as well, already on his bottles, does that. Now the big job is to go out there and persuade everyone else to start doing it. And that's word of mouth, that's getting traction on it, and that's showing the industry that the consumer wants this. And that's our job, to go out and kind of sell it in a way. And, we've had really amazing feedback from the press, from the trade. We said in the beginning, we may not have got this right. This is a conversation. This is a conversation starter. And, people have really, really fed back well. We've had some great articles in journals and in newspapers. So I think the consumer is ready. And if the consumer is ready, then the producers have to up their game and give the consumer what they want, because otherwise they're going to get left behind. And I think, actually really interesting, I was looking at my rum figures from when we started the classification system and year to date versus last year. We've gone up 73% in volume on rum sales, and 163% in value. So that shows me that the consumer wanted this. It wanted some way of having a conversation with the category, because there's no way those figures have come from anything else. And rum producers take note. Yeah, the consumer wants it, so it's up to them to engage with us. And I've even gone out and said to people, look, if you want me to come and go into talk to your if you've got a shops or anything, if you want me to go and help you with the classification, I will do it off my own back for free, because I think it's, unless we engage a wider audience, this movement will stop, and we don't want that to stop. So I think, it's a good question, but I'd love to see it on a bottle and not one that I've made the producer do.
So as a visual here, so we're sitting in front of two bottles now. We've got the Foursquare 2007 single blended rum, and then we've also got the Last Ward 2007 from Habitation Vellier, 100% pot still distillation. Thank you. Again, a little bit of devil's advocate here. One of the things that kind of stood out, I guess, from when we last spoke, and it was super interesting listening back to it. Actually, you're talking about the packaging in spirits, and that being something that was sort of stood out and drew people in, when they walked down an aisle, and maybe versus a sort of a more traditional wine label. My only observation here, I think it's super clear in terms of what is inside. My only observation here is that the labels then, I guess by necessity, that they do get a little bit wordy. They do then have to sort of, have those classifications written out there. And I don't know, this is maybe speculative, or this is maybe just, a part of the evolution. Do you see, kind of, I guess, where do you see this potentially going? Is this potentially something that the information would sort of almost go onto a back label, and then it would still give you the front as real estate to kind of, be your shop window and sort of draw people in with your branding? Or do you kind of see this going in a different direction? Or is it sort of okay as it is?
I think if we look at wine, that probably gives us the best idea. Wine, you have to put certain information on it if you're an appellation. And the front label is actually the back label. And at the end of the day, you can do as much as you want on the back label and people still get the information. So I think it's nice if it's on the front label, but just maybe the very simple facts. Is it a single traditional pot? Is it a single traditional column? Is it a blended traditionalist rum? That is nice, because that's a simple, clear, one couple of word bit of information, as well as the brand name. I think when you're starting then talking about aged origin, or no additives and things, that's very simple to go on the back label. And I think you can still do a very clean, fun label. If you look at a lot of wine labels out there, some of them don't even have anything on the front label. You don't even know what it is, and all the information's on the back. So I think, if I take the wine world as an example, or Scotch whisky as an example, Scotch whiskies, if you look at them, they have single malt on the front. You can do it in both ways. And I think that, luckily I'm not a label designer, but, I think you can still have beautiful labels without having too much information, I think. And also, we're web-based consumers nowadays. If you can go in and scan a ID code or whatever it's called, and, bring up information on that product, then that's as good. As long as the information is out there for the consumer, I don't have a problem where it is.
I'm sort of, again, playing devil's advocate here, because I think it feels like an important moment, actually, in terms of the point in the evolution, and that it's already out there in the market, that it's already sort of showing results. So I guess when I go to spirit shows, kind of not so much the elephant in the room, but like the big boy in the room is always gin. And I notice you've mentioned a couple of times, across the rum category, you've made the comparison. You've spoken about whiskey, you've spoken about wine. You haven't spoken about gin to so far. And I'm just curious, kind of draw a line here. Has gin done something similar in the past? Have they needed to do that in terms of their classification? Has their success sort of come in spite of that? And just kind of bring gin into the conversation.
Right. Now you've opened a can of worms. So I actually had a conversation with someone the other day about this, because I really feel gin's done an amazing job. Don't get me wrong. The gin growth is incredible. Half of it is actually not gin. In fact, the thing that's driving the category is flavour-led botanical spirits. Because a definition of gin legally is that it must be juniper-led in flavour. Now, if you can tell me you can taste juniper in half these gins out there, well, then you're a better man than me. You can see I get quite upset about gin. I really, really think gin is probably gone too far down the road, but it really needs something to scale it back and to really say, these are not gins. Half of the growth is not gin. These flavours do not represent gin in any way, shape or form. They are botanical spirits, fine. But you are lying to the customer. And, I think it's so... And that's why this need for transparency in spirits is so desperate. I think because actually where rum will benefit from gin is around the flavour. And flavoured rums will win off the back of flavoured gins. I had a really interesting chat with a guy called Ed Mundy, who's an analyst in the drinks industry, and he actually said every time you get a rise in flavours, so when you saw the increase in flavours in vodka as a category died. And, gin's going to have the same thing. There's very, very clear trend patterns that when you go down too much down the flavour route, the category suffers as a whole. But, it is a way of getting people into rum through a... not back door, but through flavoured rums. But, we do know that the consumer's palate changes. So when they start drinking sort of flavour things and then they sort of start getting more experience into a category, then they change and they try different things and they're more open to things. And rum is a very easy product to understand and to taste. And I think that is a huge advantage. And, I think gin is gin and there are some absolutely amazing producers out there, don't get me wrong, but I think there's a lot more complexity that you can find in rum, which then, allows you to open a door for the whiskey drinker or the wine drinker that wants something really, really interesting. And, I did a tasting on Tuesday night with one of my very good wine friends, and I made him go to Trailer Happiness afterwards, and I gave him a rum lecture at 12 o'clock at night, probably not the best thing. And I gave him a CLAIRIN from Haiti, which is as pure a rum as you can get. I mean, this guy is a proper wine geek. He loves anything that's sort of natural fermentation, very naturally produced wines. Not natural wines, but naturally produced wines. And I gave him this CLAIRIN, which is literally that these guys are real sort of... This is the heart of terroir for me in rum. And, he had this CLAIRIN and he was like, oh my God, this is amazing. He goes, I've never tasted anything like this. He goes, this is incredible. And, it's because it was so pure and so fresh and, you get the sense of place and everything. And it appealed to him. And I really feel that with the wine drinker, you can appeal to them with this style of rum. If we look at rums from Martinique, which are actually regulated, they have an AOC, like cognac, like champagne. And, the more countries that put laws down to strengthen their own, let's, for want of a better word, use the word terroir, the better the consumer is going to understand the category. And gin tried to do that with London Dry. Well, hello, what does London Dry mean? I think half the consumer doesn't know. And I think with rum, if they don't do this quickly, they run the risk of potentially just creating a category of rum. Well, what does that mean? Nothing. Probably means in most people's heads, sweet and flavoured product. They need to define themselves. And islands are doing it. So Barbados has some really good laws in place. I think there's a lot more that can be done there. And there's a lot of sort of controversy at the moment around that. And where it's aged is super important. What can be added into it is super important. In Barbados, they can't add sugar, which is great. When you're having a rum from Barbados, no sugar. Well, that's a law. That's important that is upheld as part of their, GI or whatever they sort of go for. In Jamaica, same things. They've just got a GI just now, and there's a lot of conversation around what that means. And, you know, it's important. You have to have these. It does not stifle innovation. You have innovation within a framework. And, you know, the wine industry has managed with innovation within a framework for years. And it's given consumers a really clear understanding of what that product is. And I think that is super, super important for me from a kind of being a consumer, I guess, not just a buyer, but a consumer.
So just as a visual, we've got a selection of rums here lined up on the counter, and Dawn is going to do her thing and I guess, bring together much of what you've been speaking about already into the glass, essentially. So, over to you.
So the first rum I've got in front of you. So I've got two rums, and what I wanted to do here is show you two white rums that are essentially one from sugarcane juice and one from molasses based. So the sugarcane juice is from CLAIRIN. It's a COMMUNAL, so it's their blend of the four main producers, and this is the Haitian rum. And then the molasses-based rum is actually a London rum from Bimber Distillery, just down the road. And so what you should see is when you're smelling the CLAIRIN, you should get this really lovely, grassy, herbaceous, beautiful fruit, almost a little sort of zesty notes, some almonds, some really, this is so much on the nose on there, but you're really smelling pure sugarcane juice. And as I said before, this is as natural as rum can get. On the palate, you should have, because this is made in a traditional columns, stills, you should have a little bit of weight, not too much, but some roundness, some richness. And again, that's super fresh, clean, very pure flavours. Now, if you go to the molasses base, you probably should have tasted that one first because it's less punchy on the palate. Maybe have a sip of water. On the nose, it's going to be much gentler. You're not going to get so much aromatics. You're going to get probably more sort of soft fruit notes, a little bit more kind of, maybe a little bit of sort of dried fruit character in there. A little kind of sugary, kind of, you can't smell sugar, but brown sugar kind of notes.
Caramelly.
Yeah, caramel note is a really good one. And on the palate, this one should have a little bit more roundness, so sort of, but not as much punch of flavour. So that gives you a really kind of good indication between molasses and sugarcane juice. And I think that's really sort of a nice way of kind of defining the two, because that's your base product. Yeah. Whatever happens now, whether you put it into wood or whatever, those characters should keep coming through the distillate. So I've now put 4 glasses in front of you, and 4 different rums, each from the different production style. There's 3 molasses-based rums and 1 sugarcane juice-based rum. So the first one in front of you is the Modernist, single Modernist, 1 distillery, but it is got some multi-column in it, but it also has some pot column. So this is from DIPLOMATICO. It's Mantuano, and it's a really sort of lovely, easy drinking rum. What you'll find is it is still quite light on the palate, and that is that indication of that Modernist. It's got some nice dried fruit characters. So this, for me, in sort of flavour camp, sort of sits in between that dry and spicy and that fruity and spicy camp, because there is a lovely fruit there, and you get some dried raisins, but, you know, it's still quite light and easy. Yeah. And that's the influence of that Modernist still coming through. Sure. So the second one you've got is from RIVIERES. RIVIERES is a agricole rum from Martinique. So this is a VSOP, in the same way as they look at, because it's a French colony, they use sort of Armagnac and Cognac classifications when they were looking at the aging. And this is a traditional column still. So it's a single traditional column still. So here you're going to have a little bit more weight on the palate than the Mantuano. A little bit more of that kind of sugarcane influence coming through, that juice coming through. So you should get a little bit of that kind of vegetal note just sitting there. You know, it's not super present, but it's definitely makes itself known. A little bit of that dried spice. And for me, this sits in that sort of slightly grassy, herbaceous range with a little bit of sort of that fruit and spice. But really nice. Again, do you see there's a little bit more weight on the palate than the first one? Yeah. So then as we kind of climb up, kind of in terms of weight on the palate, we've got the Mount Gay XO. So Mount Gay is a rum from Barbados. I went to Mount Gay about 5 years ago, and it is really fantastic rum producers. They're doing some amazing things there. And there are Bajan rums, so it's a blend of pot still and column still. So here, you've got a little bit more weight from that pot coming through. It's but you've still got that sort of lightness and easy drinking character coming through from that column still. This one's going to definitely be sitting in the fruit and spice note, because you've got a lot of fruit there, but you've got oak aging, so you've got the influence of that sort of oak spice coming through. And this one for me definitely is, there's no added sugar in this one at all. Same with Trois Rivières. It really just, it's a little bit more serious in style here, got a little bit more complexity. And you've got that influence of the weight of the pot. So, and this is the XO from them, which I think is a fantastic rum. Now, not to quite finish off, but just probably kill your palate, because this is definitely what I call tropical and fruity. This is from HAMPDEN. It's a single pot still rum. No additions. They use natural yeast during fermentation, long slow fermentation. They have the influence of what we call the muck pits, the dunder pits, which are basically bacteria breeding grounds. Think of your mother dough. If you're a sourdough bread maker, essentially your muck pit is your sourdough starter. Best way to think about it. And this is fruit. I mean, this is banana. It's like tropical papaya, mango. It's spicy and delicious, but it's a beast of a wine. And again, if you look at the weight on the palate, because the one thing that you can sort of blind taste is in terms of, maybe not in terms of, say, flavour so much, but definitely in terms of weight and structure on the palate, will very much be able to tell you how the rum was produced. Because, they've gone up very much so in terms of how they've been made. So those were all from a single distillery. So you had your CLAIRIN COMMUNAL, which is definitely your herbaceous and grassy. You've got your Bimber, which sort of sits in between that sort of light and uncomplicated style. You've got then MANTUANO, which is the sort of in between kind of your dry and spicy and your rich and treacly. You've got Trois Rivières, which kind of sits in between your herbaceous and grassy and your fruit and spice. And then you've got Mount Gay XO, which is definitely in your fruity fruit and spice, and then the big boy at the end, HAMPDEN, which is very much tropical and fruity. And that kind of gives you a really good idea of that sort of single distillery character. So the last two I brought in because I think they're quite interesting in terms of character. So DUPPY Share, I launched the DUPPY in Selfridges back in the day, probably almost about 7 years ago, and I really adore George Frost, who's behind it. He is an absolute legend. It's a blend of rums, and so this is what we would call a blended traditionalist style. So it's pot column, no added sugars. This is just a really lovely, for me, if you're going to start with a rum, this is probably one of the nicest ones to start with. It's a really easy drinking style, but it's still serious at the same time. And the DUPPY is the devil that steals the rum from the cask. So you don't have an angel in the Caribbean, you have a DUPPY. And, I think it's it's a good way of saying, yes, there are rums in the Caribbean and all over the world that are blended between islands in the same way as a Scotch whisky would be. And this is a really nice example of one of those styles of rums. Just beautifully easy drinking. That would sit in probably the fruit and spice category, because there's lovely fruit there, but then still that lovely sort of spice of wood. And one trend that's sort of really coming on board now with rums is there's a lot of bottlers out there. So you traditionally have people like the Bristol Company, Habitation Vellier, who've done a lot of work, even though they work directly with the producers, more so than buying casks. And these guys is Compagnie and they're a French company. And the one thing that, we've talked about is aging and origin. Compagnie does buy casks and then does further age them in France. This is actually a Fijian rum, which is quite interesting. And, I think there's, again, going back to this idea of transparency, these guys will tell you where they've aged, for how long. That's great. I don't mind if it's aged in another country. I just want to know. And this would, this has got that lovely sort of fruit from, I think Fiji is a blend of pot and column. Correct me if I'm wrong, anyone out there. And, we are going to see more of these single cask rums for absolute sure. They're going to go down the way of the indie bottlers in Scotland. And I think it's great. It's a conversation starter. But there's a lot of rum that's just been sitting in Europe aging and is going to be different because you're not going to have that sort of, I don't want to call it accelerated aging because it's not accelerating aging, but in the Caribbean you're going to lose between 7 and 13% of your liquid every year. That's a huge difference to losing 3%, 3-4%. That, and then there's also wood aging's not just about how much evaporation is. It's also about the exchange of oxygen because the oxygen sort of oxidizes the alcohols, so it does change flavor. And anything that's done in hot, humid conditions is going to be very different than cool Europe, even though it has been a little warm this summer. And I really like what these guys are doing because they're very transparent about things, and their rums that they buy, the single casks that they buy are excellent. And again, no additions on these ones either. So there's so much out there in rum that you can talk about. I could go on for another 2-3 hours. I won't bore you all to pieces, but there's such a great conversation to be had at the moment around this category, and it just needs a wee bit of love, I think.
Cool. Okay. And I just do want to put this on there, and a huge thank you to you, Dawn. For putting in I guess all of the work that you're doing as well in terms of the categorization, but then also specifically this morning in terms of putting in the work here to choose these different rums and do so very thoughtfully and have that be your narrative, I guess, as a display, as a I guess a realization of a lot of the things you've been talking about there in terms of the classification. And it's my intention to list all of these rums so that should anybody listening either have one in their collection or want to seek one out on the basis of your description, they can sort of rewind and taste along with you, which I think is a great way to kind of experience these in a different way. What better way than to have Dawn sort of there next to you, talking with you about the rum. Again, finally, thank you again for your time. It's been a real education for me this morning, and I genuinely think this will help a lot of people out there. In kind of classic interpreting wine style, I just really invite you to look forward and just kind of tell us what is kind of on the horizon for you. What are you looking forward to in terms of the rum category, and what do you think is going to be floating your boat going forward?
As I said, thank you for coming down because I'm genuinely excited about, I guess, spreading the word. I'm turning into evangelical Christian about rum. It's and I think it's something that there's so much. It's brought me so much joy just because it's so interesting and the people are so interesting, and I've made some amazing friends through rum, and I think if you can come down and talk to these guys and listen to them and taste with them. We're having Whisky show coming up in 6 weeks time, and we're going to we've got a rum section there, and we've put a rum section into Whisky show for the sort of second year running because we really are so passionate about this category. All the rums that will be on show will be pure singles, so no additions, but really kind of what we say whiskey drinkers rums. So www.whiskyshow.com, have a look online. Also, you've got Rum Fest coming up. I'm being very generous and giving in a bit of a push. But, these are all places that you can learn about rum and taste rum and go into any of our shops, our shop in Covent Garden or our shop in Great Portland Street. The guys will be more than happy to open some bottles and taste with you. And, that's what we want to do. We want to get out there, get you guys tasting because that's how you learn. And there's so much excitement out there. Please feel free to ping us questions on our Instagram or on our Facebook page because we're really, really happy to engage and talk and have a conversation. For me, this is something that has changed my life actually, and I think it's something that the conversation needs to be kind of brought forward, and we need you guys, the customer, to make these guys realize what you want out of a bottle and on a label. And that's hugely important. So thank you for listening to me ramble on for too long.
Thank you so much, Dawn. As I mentioned, you being there right at the start of the series, I couldn't think of anybody that I'd rather have finishing it off for us. A true deep dive of the rum category in 2019, and I'm sure what you've shared will be of interest to the novice and expert alike. Do see below for the names of each of the rums, their production method, and the product link on the Whisky Exchange website. There are also details below of how you can book for the Whisky Show, whose guest spirit this year again, as Dawn mentioned, is going to be rum, and all the main social media handles for the Whisky Exchange also. Of course, I would love to have you following along with me on social media, where I'm at Interpreting Wine on Instagram and Facebook, at Wine Podcast on Twitter, and email hello@interpretingwine.com. It's only left for me to say a huge thank you to all of the guests in this series. Peter Holland, Sly Augustin and Dawn Davies. I had so much fun sitting down with you all to get your take on the state of rum in 2019, and I'd love to leave the door open to doing another series next year. See you next time. Hello again, guys. Just want to say a huge thank you for listening so far to the series. I really hope that the podcast in general, and that this series in particular, is bringing you a lot of value. And while we're on the subject, if you know a rum or spirits fanatic, it would mean the world to me if you would share this series with them, either by sharing the link where they can listen to this episode, or by tagging them in my rum series post on Interpreting Wine on Instagram. And while you're there, why not give me a follow? And let's continue the rum conversation over there.